Look inside, it's beautiful. And that orange flavor, it pairs so beautifully with the milk chocolate. It doesn't overpower the orange. That glaze just actually helps to kind of lift up the donut. It's definitely lifting my spirits. These are so good. Hey, I'm Valerie, and today we're gonna be making tiger donuts. This is a recipe from my cookbook, Life is What You Bake It, and you might be wondering, what is a tiger donut? Well, I gave it that name because it's an orange donut with a milk chocolatey glaze that's kind of drizzled to look like tiger stripes. I really love orange in this donut because the orange zest, it's very vibrant, and that vibrant orange flavor just kind of lifts them up, makes them feel really refreshing and really light. I created this recipe when I was competing on the Great American Baking Show, and before that show I had never made a good donut in my life, but I was convinced to not let donuts get me kicked off. So this recipe ended up being a huge hit. I even got a Paul Hollywood handshake out of it, and I was star baker that week. This is a recipe that is a winner. So to make our dough, making them in a stand mixer, and I'm gonna start by adding my liquid ingredients. Just poured my warm milk in. This recipe is great because I'm letting the mixer do most of the work for me, and I'm adding my melted butter, because when you're making bread in a stand mixer, it's best to add your liquid ingredients all at the bottom. I'm adding my egg and egg yolks. Next, I'm gonna add my sugar. You need a packet of instant yeast. I've got a jar, and the equivalent of a packet is 2 teaspoons plus 1/4 teaspoon. And the reason I love instant yeast, unlike active dry yeast, you don't have to activate it, so you don't have to do all of that nonsense with like mixing it with the milk and letting it sit for 10 minutes before you get started. You can just put it right in. I'm gonna add my all-purpose flour, my bread flour. I'm gonna add some salt, and if you notice, I'm not putting the salt directly on the yeast because salt kills yeast. So whenever you're making a recipe, you don't wanna put the salt directly on the yeast. The last thing I'm gonna do, orange zest. If you can get the organic kind that's not waxed, you're gonna be getting a lot more of that, lovely citrus oil flavor that's in the zest, because that's where all the flavor is. It's not really in the juice, it's in the zest. I'm going to use the dough hook attachment for my stand mixer because I'm gonna let the machine do the work of kneading the dough for me. We're gonna knead this on low for a few minutes before we increase the speed, and we'll knead it until we have gluten development. It'll take around 10 minutes. It might take a little bit more, it might take a little bit less. So I'm just gonna let that go for a couple of minutes just to kind of stir and get all of the ingredients combined. And you do want to make sure that your dough hook is actually kneading all of the dough. And it's definitely starting to look smoother and more elastic, so I'm just gonna break off a piece of dough. Oh, it feels nice. And how I'm gonna test for gluten is I'm just gonna it's called the window pane test. And I'm just gonna kind of use my fingers to get it as thin as possible, and it should be so thin that a light can easily pass through. So it's close, but we got a little tear. So we're gonna keep going. And because we use bread flour in this recipe that does have a high protein content, just takes longer for the gluten to develop. If you are kneading by hand, you're gonna need at least double the amount of time that we're using with the stand mixer. We've been going a total of about 12 minutes, 2 minutes on a lower speed and about 10 minutes on a medium speed. The dough looks really beautiful. It looks really smooth and elastic. It feels good and it smells good. Oh, that orange. This looks good. I think we're done. Now we're gonna let the dough rest. So I'm just gonna kind of form it into a ball. And at this point, you could put it in a different bowl. I'm just gonna keep this in this bowl for now. I want it to rest until it's doubled in size, and it's gonna take about an hour. It might take an hour and a half, 2 hours. You just wanna make sure that it's doubled in size. Look, I love these machines because I took a week-long bread making class in Paris, and every loaf we made, we had to knead by hand. It was a great experience to meditate. I much prefer using the machine. It's something that you can do and not have to worry about, you know, arthritis in the future, which actually happened to my great Aunt Hester, whose recipe for dinner rolls is also in my book. I made this a little bit earlier. It's doubled in size. So what I'm gonna do now is what's called punching it down. It's not kickboxing class, but I want to deflate the air. And you can put some flour on your hands, just a little bit so that they don't kind of stick to the dough. And now I'm just gonna fold it like a letter. So in 3 parts, so that's 1 part, and then another part over. I'm gonna flip it over. I'm gonna let it rise one more time before we roll out and cut our donuts. This dough, it is a bit of a labor of love. Because it rises twice in the bowl, it's what's gonna give the donuts that super supple, fluffy texture that makes these donuts really special. So this is gonna take about 45 minutes. Our donuts have now risen twice. So I'm just gonna use a pizza slicer and slice them so we are gonna have minimal scraps, maximum donuts. We want a good bit of flour because you don't want your donuts sticking, because once we roll them out and they rise, it is very important to retain that air. That air is going to be what makes our donuts really fluffy and supple. So I'm gonna pat it down into a square. And unlike last time, when I was really doing my best to get the air out of it, I'm not gonna do that this time. I'm gonna kind of try to keep as much air as possible and just pat it down to 3/4 of an inch thick, because they're going to rise a second time. And they will also rise when they hit that hot oil. I want this to be 3/4 of an inch, so it actually already is 3/4 of an inch. I want my donuts to be about 2.5 inches, so I'm just measuring and slicing. Most of our donuts are squares. We've got a few triangles and like a trapezoid. We're gonna cut out our donut holes. I have a pretty large piping tip, and I'm just gonna push it straight down, and that's gonna be the center for our donut hole. And it's actually really good to have scraps when you're frying donuts, because we're gonna fry those scraps and will actually help us cool off the oil if the oil is too hot. And of course, have little snacks. So I have a baking sheet with some flour, and I'm just gonna transfer my donuts to this sheet so that they have plenty of space to rise, because they're gonna rise a lot. But I also want to be able to easily move them from the pan into the hot oil. I'm gonna cover these lightly and just let them rise. I want them to look like they're about to pop. So it's probably gonna take them about 30 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and quickly make our glaze. I've got 2 cups of powdered sugar, and I'm gonna add the zest from an orange. The thing about a glaze for donuts, or really a glaze for anything, as far as the liquid, you can use pretty much anything. You can use milk, you can use water. If you don't want orange and you want lemon, you could use lemon zest and lemon juice, and even like some lemon liqueur. That would be excellent. I'm gonna add my orange liqueur, 2 tablespoons. So I'm just gonna add a little orange juice and see if I'm at the consistency that I want for my glaze. So it's okay if your glaze is a little on the thicker side, because it's not gonna look thick on the donut. Great, I like this consistency. This consistency is fine. I want to fry these right at 325, give or take about 5 degrees. It's really important to monitor the temperature of your oil. So our donuts have risen. They're ready to go into the oil, where they're gonna rise even more. With these donuts, you want to make sure that you have enough oil because we're deep frying them. And they also need a little bit of space to bob around. So you don't want to crowd the oil by putting in too many donuts at once. I'm gonna fry about 3 donuts at a time. You want to make sure the depth is at least 2 inches. So we've climbed over 320, we're in that 5-degree range, and I can start frying my donuts. I'm going to gently, carefully pick up a donut and drop it into the oil. And you must be very gentle at this point because you do not want to deflate the beautiful donuts. And I'm gonna fry these for about 60 to 75 seconds on one side until they are golden brown. And monitoring the oil is something that should just be done continuously. So I'm again checking the temperature. All right, so let's check and see how they are. Oh, that's perfect, it's golden brown. And then flip them over and fry them again for another 60 to 75 seconds. These are the perfect golden brown color that I'm looking for. I just have a plate lined with a paper towel that's ready to go because that paper towel is gonna help absorb any excess grease. That's a reason why it's so important to fry these at the right temperature. If your oil is not hot enough, the donuts are gonna absorb more grease. And if your oil is too hot, they're gonna be brown on the outside but not cooked on the inside. So I'm just gonna let these sit on this plate before I move them along in the assembly line because they're super hot right now. A couple of these even have the ring of truth. Look at that. That lets you know we made a good donut. We start singing, we know that we made a good donut. So we want to glaze these while they're still hot. I'm gonna just go ahead and dunk it in. I'm going to flip it. We want to glaze both sides. Let the residual glaze kind of fall off. And I just have these on a wire rack, so any excess glaze can just drip right from the pan into that rack. Oh my gosh, this makes me excited. This is what we're going for because apparently if your final product looks like it does in the book, it means you did it right. So we finished frying, we glazed, and now we drizzle. We have to give the tiger its stripes. I have some milk chocolate that's been melted, and as you can see, it's nice and melty. That is a very important quality in chocolate for this recipe. Before I melted this chocolate, I actually melted an inferior brand of chocolate, and it is not melty at all. Be careful because if you use the cheapest milk chocolate you can find, you might end up with some kind of stabilizer in it that isn't gonna get you the nice melty that you need for the drizzle. So for our drizzle, we're keeping this super casual. This is not perfect little stripes. This is imperfect drizzles. I love milk chocolate in this recipe because milk chocolate pairs with the orange so beautifully. You can use dark chocolate, but I find that the dark chocolate gives a flavor that kind of overpowers the orange flavor. They smell so good. I think I need to eat one. These are like thick. These are so good. Totally worth the second rise. This is definitely something that you guys want to make. Make these donuts. You're going to love them. Like this video and subscribe so that I can see you next time. We have so much more to bake. All right, I'll see you guys next time.